Hello everyone and welcome to Cinderful Gaming. I hope you're all doing well, I hope you're all staying safe, and most of all, I hope you're all fighting that war against the Grey. Today's video, we're going to go through some army building tips and ideas for you all in Age of Sigmar 3rd edition. Now, I'm quite a few games deep of Age of Sigmar, and by no means am I a top tier competitive player. However, what I've found over the course of the games I've played so far, about 30 odd games now of Age of Sigmar 3rd edition, are some things that maybe aren't quite as obvious when you're building your first army list, or maybe things that are now new to having to build into your army list that weren't there previously in 2nd edition. So what I'd like to do in this video is I'd like to go through some little tips and some ideas of things to think about when building your list. Not all of these need to be apparent in all games. There may be some army lists that completely can ignore some of the things I'm going to say in this video, and there may be some that maybe need to take a harder look at some than others as well. This is just going to be a video of some tips and ideas and things I've thought of about my own army lists and my own sort of playing of the game during my time playing New Edition, and I want to give some thoughts and ideas and share what I've experienced so far, so hopefully everyone can get a little bit of information out of all the games I've played. Anyway, we're going to go into it now. There's going to be some tips and ideas for building your army in Age of Sigmar 3rd edition. Number 1, multiple buff sources. Now, I obviously don't mean this as in the straight up thing of you need multiple buffs throughout your army, but maybe the same sort of buffs, take them multiple times across your army so that you can enable to get them. Now, this doesn't have to be specific abilities, say like a Lord Castellan in Stormcast Eternals providing +1 save to a unit nearby him, but it could also be multiple people around enabling you to use command abilities, effects and stuff, and just sort of spread these abilities across your army. Because you are now limited to how many you can use with command abilities each turn and each phase as well, you can only use one each phase, and each command ability can only be used once. You now need to maybe have those command abilities accessible in multiple places across your army. Generally, I look at this like, for instance, my Scourge Privateer army. I'm really considering taking a 2nd Black Ark Fleet Master. This is going to enable me to have both my big units able to get +1 attack with my Scourge Privateers on the battlefield, rather than having to pair my Privateer or my General either between the two, which really sort of blocks my army together, or pick one of my units for him to have to go with and leave the other one without that particular buff. This is something I've noticed a lot, and because it's harder to spread those command abilities now, because you can't use them in multiple ways, I think definitely having those multiple buff sources across your army and ways to get buffs, the same buff in different parts of your army whilst not having the same model relying on it, is something really interesting and useful to do for your army. Number 2, plan ways to complete your battle tactics. Battle tactics are a new part of the game that's come in the 3rd edition of Age of Sigmar, and they are perhaps one of my favourite parts about the game now, is they make you do things you otherwise might not have in the game. Now, when you're looking at the battle tactics, there are the 8 available to us, and we're completing 6 a turn. However, I think it's really important that your army is able to complete every single battle tactic in it. Now, this means not only having to look at your army list and making sure you're including units that can complete those battle tactics, making sure you have enough units to complete battle tactics, but also thinking how you can complete them on the field of battle. You're going to need the potential to maybe take out your opponent's general, so you're going to need units with high damage output potentially to get rid of some of the big hitters in the game. That's something worth considering. Now, there is also ways to go, well, that's a battle tactic I'm never going to complete with this army. Say your opponent's regularly taking like an Archaon or something like that, that's really hard to remove. So why not discard that one and then focus on others more so? That's a potential thing. Obviously, you want to make sure you can complete at least 6 of these in the game. Rather 5, one for every turn. But I think aiming for 6 of them is the best way to go, meaning you have that one sort of fail-safe at least. 7 is better, and 8 is of course the best thing you can do. If you can complete all the 8 battle tactics with your army and you're confident you can, that's amazing, but at least aim for 1 more than what the battle round length of the game is, because that way you've at least got at least 1 fail-safe in there. Number 3, grand strategy plans. Once again, like battle tactics, this is something brand new to the new edition of Age of Sigmar, and this is something I definitely do throw away a lot, especially in my more casual games. I really don't think about this too much. I go something like, and I'm on camera having said this in multiple battle reports, well, I've got lots of battle line units, so I'll just pick have a battle line unit survive, because if I don't have that, I've lost the game anyway. That, however, is probably the wrong way of thinking. The more I've thought about that, it is definitely the wrong way of thinking, and how I think about it now is how can I complete and make sure I get a grand strategy to work for me, even if my army is wiped off the table or my army is heavily depleted, making sure I can get those 3 points. In a competitive setting, this is far more important, as generally it's now seen as victory points will be a good tiebreaker in your events, so it's worth considering those points as something to gain in all your games and something to work towards. Because don't forget also, your grand strategy is in your actual battle plan generally the third tiebreaker. So if you're joint on victory points, you're then joint on your battle tactics, and it then goes down to your grand strategy. So having yours completed is very important in that sort of sense. I think looking at your grand strategy and making sure you can complete it, even if your army is heavily deleted, or even if you're wiped off the table, if you can get that grand strategy on and completed, it's great. Number 4, trades and planning for them. Now, what I mean by a trade in Warhammer Age of Sigmar is when you've put one of your units to wipe out your opponent's unit, but knowing that your opponent is then going to wipe them out in return. This is a trade. Now, this might be something that you need to work into your army list to think of ways you can get rid of your opponent's units quickly with a high damage unit of your own that maybe perhaps doesn't have great damage, but in doing so, putting this unit into your opponent, removing their really strong piece, you're happy to sacrifice this unit on the table to get rid of that piece on the table. So for instance, let's say your opponent has a really strong unit of, let's say, something like a unit of Witch Elves is a really strong unit they have. And you want to get rid of that, and say you've invested heavily, or not even heavily, you've invested in this unit of, say, 3 good greatswords, and you've put some buffs on them, and you're confident they're going to take out those Witch Elves. Now, just bear with me, they might not be the unit to take out, I'm just using this as an example. However, those greatswords then go in, kill the Witch Elves of which your opponent is a valuable unit to them, and then your opponent charges in, say, Marathi, and kills off those greatswords in return. That's a trade, and it's worth planning to have units in your army to be that really offensive unit to then die after from the counter attack. But what you've done is you've removed something from your opponent's army and sort of taken the game down a level. These are things to sort of maybe have a look at and plan on, maybe not just in your army list, but in how you're playing your games on these sort of, if I remove this, this is going to die, but that actually still benefits me, is a way to sort of consider those trades. So definitely something to be thinking about in both building your army list to have units available to trade, so high damage output units that don't necessarily cost a lot of points. I've done this in, say, my Wanderer's army with my Wildwood Rangers. They're really good at taking out monsters. I can throw them into a monster, but they're probably going to die from the next monster because they don't have great defense. Number 5, hammers and anvils. Now, this is something to consider on what your unit's purposes are on the table. Now, not every unit needs to be a hammer or an anvil, but it's definitely worth considering having some of each in your army. Hammers are units that go in and deal damage. Anvils are units that stay in their ground and can receive a charge and receive damage and not falter. So, when you're building an army list, it's important to have a couple of hammers throughout your army list, things that can deal damage and remove your opponent's pieces off the table. And at the same point, it's good to have anvils of your own that can't be removed off the table and generally will be the counter to your opponent's own hammers. So this game between hammers and anvils is a really interesting thing on the tabletop, in that you're going to want your anvils to be sitting on your home objectives, or maybe moving up and sitting in centrally based objectives, or even deep striking into your opponent's territory after you've cleared them with your hammers and controlling your opponent's objectives. All of these are ways your anvils can work on the table, and hammers are wanting to be clearing off your opponent's anvils, getting rid of those hard to move pieces. This is going to go back into that point I was talking about before with trades, because hammer and anvils will generally trade with each other. You'll generally remove an anvil only to see your hammer removed maybe by your opponent's own hammer in return. So this is just something to consider on building up those hammers, figuring out what your hammers are in the army, which ones can really deal the damage to remove your opponent's pieces, and which units you have that can hold. Making sure you have both those units that can deal damage and some that can hold is really important. It's probably also worth mentioning as well that an anvil, I definitely will say, doesn't have to be a great defensive unit, say with a 2-up or 3-up save. It can also just be bodies. Things like grots are really great anvils because they put out some negatives to hit, and they also just have a ton of bodies and generally battle shock immunity near them as well. So this is another great version of an anvil, though slightly different, I guess, in what people are thinking of when they think of what an anvil is. 6. Loners and power pairs. Now, this is another thing similar, I guess, to hammers and anvils. In fact, and it sort of works in the same sort of way. By loners, I mean units that are self-sufficient. They can either give themselves their own buffs or they don't need them at all. This is maybe, looking at this picture I've got here, this is something like the Celestin Prime. He's a character, so he can give himself +1 to hit, reroll charges. He gets to modify dice rolls with his own particular rules. He's a great example of a lone unit that works by himself and goes and does things by himself. Next to him, you have things like the Sequitors or the Evocators that work really well when paired with the Lord Arcanum behind them. This is a great example of a power pair, 2 units that combine well to make something better than what the 2 units are on their own. Having a multitude of these things in your army is great. I think you definitely need both things in your army to really work. I find, say with my Scourge Privateers, I put my Black Ark Fleetmaster and a unit of Black Ark Corsairs. That's a power pair I have together. And then my Dreadlord on Black Dragon is a lone killer because he can give himself +1 to hit, +1 to wound quite easily. He works really well on his own, able to go do off his own thing and kill off units by himself without needing any support. Meanwhile, the Corsairs need the Fleetmaster and the Sorceress behind them to get the most efficiency out of those models. So just something to think about, having those 2 different things in your army, having units that don't need anything to sort of make them go do what they do, and also having units that can work together to become better than the sum of their parts. 7. Objective control. This is of course something very important to consider in your army. How is your army going to control objectives? Is it going to control them by putting lots of bodies on the objectives? Is it going to control them by just having high damage dealing? It's going to remove all your opponent's models off the objective so you don't need to actually have any models on it of your own to control them. Or are you playing an army that has the ability to have your models count as more, so you've got more ability to sort of play with the objectives and how you control them? Things like the Gargants and Ogres are really good at this. Also, any army with access to a lot of monsters or a lot of 5-wound models. So things that have those 5 wounds, things like Storm Fiends, are really interesting in this because they count as 2 models each. Or units with a lot of characters, so something like a Halakha army with a bunch of wizards. Sitting on an objective actually counts as quite a lot of objective models. So just figuring out how your army is going to control those objectives and sort of looking at the points I've talked about before, having some anvils in your army is really good for this. You can use those anvils to hold your own objectives and also hold like midfield objectives. Meanwhile, on the other hand, you can have really powerful hammers and really powerful lone units that we've talked about before in the video as well that will help you sort of move forward and kill stuff off objectives so you can control them with very minimal models. Number 8, the meta. Now, this can be your own local meta. You definitely don't need to pay attention too much to the overall meta that goes around the internet telling you what's good and what's bad. That's somewhat important to a degree, and you definitely should pay attention. If you want to go look at what's doing well in the meta, I definitely recommend going and checking out some of my friends, either the Honest Wargamer on Twitch or YouTube, or AOS Coach as well. Really great places to find some local metadata, and AOS Shorts as well, a blog that you can find at www.aosshorts. All of those are great places to find out what's happening in the meta. However, what I would recommend definitely is looking at what's in your local playgroup. Now, you might go, oh, AOS is currently in a shooting meta, but none of my friends play Lumineth, no one plays KO, no one plays a City of Sigmar army with a bunch of Iron Drakes. Is it really something you need to worry about in your army when you're building? Now, I guess this sort of train of thought can also be thought as, I guess, building your list towards beating your friends. However, I don't think that's the spirit of what you're trying to go for with this. You're wanting to play a game and just have a good game against your opponents, so you're not wanting to bring things that aren't going to do anything, you know. You don't want to bring, say, Castigators to a game and all of a sudden no one's playing Demons or Nighthaunt against you, so your Castigators lose all their buffs. Who wants to do that? But it is worth considering, okay, well, all my friends play armies that have a lot of magic, so I need to make sure that I've got magic defense in my army. That's something to consider. All my friends play armies that are really aggressive and like charging turn 1. So you either need to be aggressive yourself or have lots of screens or lots of defensive units, lots of anvils in your army to sort of counteract this. It's just something you need to consider is what you play against a lot in your army. Not necessarily, I guess, building your army towards beating those armies, but definitely thinking about those armies in mind of how you need to sort of deal with things and things you need to watch out for in your games. Number 9, screens and bait. Now, these are 2 other terms for some units here. So first of all, screens are units that you sort of line up in front of your main units you don't want to be damaged by your opponent's charges to sort of take the brunt of your opponent's charge. die and allow you to sort of counter attack. This allows for a sort of beta strike play style. If you sort of set up your army, you've got units in front of your units that are actually the ones that are going to do anything in your army. You've got these cheap expendable units in front, they die, they're your screens, and they allow your army to beta strike against your opponent. You do also have things called bait. Now, this is a great picture here of explaining bait, where these Lumineth and Realm Lords are charging into the units of Plague Monks you see in the front of the picture, but they're actually being baited in, like they have to charge that unit and then maybe do some damage to them, but they're going to get charged from behind as well and be sort of crushed between the two. This is a good example of bait. It's a unit where you throw it forward knowing your opponent has to react to that unit or you're going to do something with them, but it's actually going to pull your opponent's units out of position and out of place, allowing you to take advantage of the situation either by capturing an objective or destroying another unit that your opponent was trying to protect with some bait, with like some screens or an anvil or something. This is going to allow you to throw things forward, tempt your opponent to do something, make them do what you want to do. Bait is really great for just enabling the tempo of the game to be played in your favor and you to be able to dictate what happens in the game. Number 10, power projection. Now, power projection is generally really good from shooting units, but it could also be really good from combat units as well that have really good movement or have rules like fly that enable them to ignore terrain and move around the battlefield much more freely. You could also have power projection from units that can either teleport around the game and units that can come in from ambush and stuff like that. What we're talking about with power projection is a unit's ability to sort of put its power in a larger area than what it actually stands on. So for instance, a good example is just shooting units. A unit of, say, let's say an scrap launcher like we've got here has a really big power projection range, because while it sits at the back corner of the battlefield, it can actually hit a wide range of stuff on the table because it's got that ability to have an attack at range. This enables it to project its power across the battlefield. Now, we could couple this, say, and go a shooting unit that also has access to really great movement is able to project that power even better because it can move quite a far distance and then also shoot. So say something with a 12-inch move has a 16-inch range, you've got a very large ability of range there because you can move 12-inch and shoot 36 or 18 or whatever and have that really great ability to just have that large area of power projection. Power projection can also be done by combat units as well. So say something that's really fast and can fly, like a dragon for instance, can move over terrain, can sort of get into tight spaces, especially something like a Dreadnought or a Black Dragon's got a really small base, can get into tight gaps that other models might not be able to or large units can't, and really project its power across the battlefield because your opponent has to wonder about where it's going to fly to and where it can get those charges off. All of this is just things to consider when playing your games and building your army, because it enables you to sort of dictate, once again, the game and the tempo of how the game goes. Stop your opponent being able to go places because they're scared of the ability of you to be able to project your power in that particular area of the battlefield. 11, monsters. Now, monsters in general are a great part of the new edition of Age of Sigmar. The battle pack for the new season that we're coming into is really heavily favouring monsters in your army. Now, first things first, it is worth noting that monsters give up victory points when they're killed. However, they only give up 1 victory point for all monsters killed in a turn. However, there are a ton of battle tactics that enable you to get extra points for doing stuff with monsters, and there's, I think, more points available for those monsters. So say you've got 1 monster in your army, that monster I think can get you about 3 or 4 extra points through the course of a game while only ever giving up 1. This is definitely something to consider. So as long as you get a point out of that monster in some way, you're not giving up anything because your opponent's only get a point back because of that. So this is really worth considering, taking monsters in your army in some sort. And don't forget, every army's got access to cool monsters now thanks to the Gargants, which are available in every army now. So really looking at what monsters you can do, I think a great thing is actually taking a couple of cheap monsters. In my Scourge Privateers, I take a couple of Charybdis. They're actually really great at just getting me some points for those monsters being on the table, whilst giving up very few. What I can do is, because they die pretty quick, you can send them into a strong target, and they'll both die on the same turn, only giving up 1 point. Meanwhile, they've collected me 3 points during the game, due to things they've already done on the table. So This is all stuff to really consider and work out how you want to do and see whether the risk versus the reward of taking monsters in your game is worth it. But generally, I do find taking those few monsters in your army is really worth it in this edition, especially if they're characters and they can self-buff themselves as well and work well as the lone units. And lastly, the ability to use command points every phase. Command points or CP, whatever you want to say. Now, with this, what I mean is you want to have models on the table that are enabling you to use command points at all times. There's a bunch of great ways you can do this, and definitely with all the generic sort of command abilities we've got with Rally in the hero phase, with the ability to use movement command abilities, charge command abilities, combat, shooting, etc., battle shock ones as well. You can use command points in every phase, and I think it's important that you sort of plan out how those command points are going to be spent. I've noticed this especially in sort of going second in the turn, that you end up going, oh, I've got a lot of command points left, because you maybe been a little bit safe on how you've sort of spent them in your first turn. You've got a couple left, so planning out, oh, well, I need command points here, I need command points here. It's not just the ability to use them, but also planning where and when you think you're going to need them as well. Because obviously you can only use a certain amount each turn, so you're wanting to sort of plan out how you're going to use these command abilities in every one of your phases, and sort of make sure you've got enough and make sure you're not wasting any, because obviously they do disappear. I found in a few of my games that maybe I'm throwing away a couple of CP at the end of some turns where I've not planned out well on how I'm going to use them. So definitely just at the top of your turn, plan out how you're going to use those command points, and not only that, but plan out how you're going to generate command points, where they're going to be sort of focused around, what units require them all times. So things like, well, say this particular model wants to always get his +1 attack command ability off, so that's a command point every turn used on him. Is there a way I can generate that command point every turn? These are the things you need to consider in your army list when building, and also when you're playing the game. And so, lastly, I'd like to hear your own experiences and things you've noticed in your games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar 3rd edition as well, that you find are sort of strong points you need to think about when building your army lists. Battle plans is maybe one that we can add to this list as well, but definitely that sort of changes time to time as well. However, leave your comments down below. Let us know what you think about all of this and your own ideas, so we have more content or more thoughts here for everyone, and especially new players, to read this and sort of go through and gather more information on how we talk about these games. With that said though, leave some comments down below. Let everyone see what your thoughts and what you've noticed in your games is. And that's all from us. Well, thank you all for watching the video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Also, while you're at it, why not come chat more with us on Discord? We've got a link in the description of the video below to our Discord server. You can come chat with me and other members of our fine little community here at Sinful Gaming. Lastly, we'd like to give a shout out to everyone who helps support the channel in various different ways. First of all, to our Patreon members, Christian Weir, James Soren, Chaos Spawn, AJC, Kenny Lowe, Outer and Shot First, James Crowder, Andrew Bowen, Nathan Fee, Tim Newman, The Rising Ape, Cure Dynamic, Agu, Anthony B, MJ, and Dyna226. Thank you to, as well, our YouTube members, Green Roots Gaming, Fire Titan, Steve T, The Real Zeop, Chris Wallace, Turiot12, Vinny, and Loch Lorick. And a special thanks to our artist who does all the channel art for us, Lady Witchfox Art, thank you very much. And to our Discord moderator, Xmorphic, you do a fantastic job on Discord for us as well. Thank you all, everyone, for watching. If you'd like to help support on Patreon or YouTube member, or help support the channel in another way, you can do so by following one of the links in the description of the video to Patreon or YouTube members, or go buy some Sinful Gaming merch from our Teespring store, also linked in the video's description. That's it for today, everyone. Thank you again. Stay safe, stay well, and most of all, keep fighting that war against the Grey. Ciao for now.